Have you ever had an idea so bad that you just needed to try it to see how bad it actually is? Well, over the past several years, I've been making these little cedar kayaks to play around with boat design. These have been an extremely valuable tool for me, even though I'm essentially an adult male playing around with toys in a creek. These toys, however, have allowed me to see what would happen to a kayak in rapids that are too dangerous given the scaled size. Anywho, my terrible idea is to build a cedar strip whitewater kayak at full size. Back in April, I started building my first whitewater boat with the guidance of Leif Anderson. This gave me an entry-level understanding of composite engineering. Once completing the kayak, I successfully surfed it as Skookumchuck for 5 days, and it didn't even explode. Essentially, the whole reason I'm doing this is because my childhood tree fell over this summer, and now I have an abundance of black walnut. Currently, I only have a few offcuts, but I wanted to do something special with it, so I settled on this nightmare of a project. The main construction will be done with cedar so the boat stays light, but I'll add some black walnut for aesthetic inlays. I really didn't have anything planned at this point. I had some ideas, but I hadn't made a mold yet. I decided to start with the pattern of the hull and then move forward. I came up with the idea of using nails to hold the strips together while the glue dried, but looking back I needed more pressure between the strips. I've heard of 2 people completing a project like this, but I haven't dived too deep into their methods. My plan is to build the boat's shape out of cedar strips, and then fiberglass the outside so the shape is solidified. Once the boat can reliably hold its form, I can match the top and bottom half to each other, lay up several layers of carbon Kevlar on the inside, and then seam the 2 halves together. This is a video of me rambling on about my biggest breakthrough in the project. You might want to avert your eyes if you're Robbie Gilson or Mac McGee. The next part can be kind of offensive. I really can't thank Owen Doyle enough for letting me use his boat. I promise I'll give it back just like I left it. By cutting out plastic from this boat, it will allow me to clamp each strip in place to ensure I have the shaping right. From there, I can glue the pieces together one by one until each half of the boat eventually takes shape. Unfortunately, I've undertaken this task in the dead of winter in Washington State, so the glue takes just about 24 hours to cure due to the low temperatures and ceaseless rain. That's only 1 strip a day at best. On top of that, the Little White was 5 feet around this time, so productivity in the shop was at an all-time low. But here I was, still chipping away at months of work. I soon found out that building this boat with a pattern was not the best way to do it. I'm really glad that I did, but it ultimately made the whole build more difficult. The pattern created fold points in the hull where the strips couldn't bend evenly. This made it really difficult to maintain symmetry on both sides. I had to do a decent number of repairs to the pattern when I moved it to the mold, but soon enough it was time to start gluing on the edge strips. I used a cardboard template to roughly cut out the flat shape of the hole, but I needed a way to ensure that the wood strips could bend accordingly. I came up with the solution of clamping the strip of wood to the mold and tracing the bend with an oscillating saw. On the first go, I was truly amazed by how easily it worked. Each strip posed its own issues, but I was pleased to see progress. It was around this point when I finally realized that this could go kind of well. I had a method that worked, and it proved to be repeatable. The process was still difficult, however. I needed to match the angle of each strip to adjust to the edge of the boat, while simultaneously respecting the curve of the hull lengthwise. I'll tell you one thing, it's pretty hard to make a fragile 2-dimensional material turn into a 3D slice machine capable of paddling the gully. I pretty much committed to this project in a matter of seconds. The idea was floating around in my head, but I distinctly remember a moment where I was like, yep, I'm doing it. I grabbed my notebook and started planning. In a craze of naive delirium, I excitedly wanted to build a Scorch-X, but then I was like, you're an idiot. Why would you build a Scorch-X out of wood? So I kept going through my boat stash to figure out what made the most sense. And there it was, the Prion Delirious, the closest thing a kayak has ever come to being a surfboard. I don't have to hit rocks, I can throw cartwheels, stern squirts, and surf it on whatever I please. The boat was perfect. If you are still confused by this project, it's essentially the same as building a carbon boat with some foreign objects thrown into the layup. The integrity of the boat will come from Kevlar, the stiffness from carbon, and the design from some has-been trees. I'm not a chemist, but the science behind carbon fabrics is actually really cool. Each thread of carbon fiber in the fabric I'm using has 3,000 strands in it. A single strand of carbon fiber is only a few atoms thick. I've tried to isolate a single thread, but it seems like an endless task. It is amazing how strong the stuff is for how thin it is. If you were like me, you were probably wondering just how in the hell this is made. It all starts with this compound called polyacrylonitrile. When it gets exposed to heat, it expels all of the atoms that are not carbon. The leftover carbon atoms are then bonded to each other in a sort of chain structure. That structure is then treated to increase bonding compatibility with things like epoxy. And somewhere along the line in human history and the evolution of technology, we figured out how to make kayaks out of this stuff. But anyway, let's get back to the wood part of the build. Maintaining symmetry proved to be pretty difficult. I tried to stick to what I knew, so I kept using the oscillating saw to trace the bend of the following wood strip. All of the material removed from one side needed to be removed at the same length on the other side and taper the same amount. This is really just because I built the pattern for the inside of the hole and then started building outward. If I started on the outside moving in, I wouldn't have to customize this much material. For For the top half of the boat, I'm planning on starting on the edges and moving inward. Then I can ensure the edges are symmetrical without making as many measurements. I like to think that this is a big kid's equivalent of a kindergarten's macaroni art project. I'm hoping the end result has a little bit more application than a child's passive school assignment, but who knows? This thing might end up in the trash before it gets a chance to touch water. And there we go. Just over 5 minutes into the video, and it only took me a month to get here. Finally, this is the last strip I needed to add to have the hole completed. It was a good feeling, but I know I'm still not even halfway done. As I've mentioned, I've had quite a few setbacks. The biggest issues came from the expansion and contraction of the wood strips under tension. The best solution I've found to this problem is using a bead and cove technique. This is where the cedar strips interlock like tongue and groove. I have a router that I could have attempted this method, but it was simply too late. The downside of all the repairs I had to make was luckily more cosmetic than structural. This was because I couldn't sand down the cedar to a perfect finish. I ended up having a decent number of splotches where the glue altered the wood color. All in all, I had to accept where the boat was for my first go. Now it is time for the glass. I was really excited for this part because it meant that the shape of the hole was finally going to be solidified. That being said, I was equally scared. I was about to pour epoxy over a month of work. If something didn't go well, there was just about nothing I could do to fix it. The epoxy would either cure into a jumbled mess of wood, sweat, and tears, or worse, the epoxy wouldn't cure, and then I would have a giant sticky piece of wood that would never turn into a boat. The epoxy I was using only had a 90-minute working time before it started to set. Because of this, I called over one of my friends, Ian Wingert, to help me lay up with the first of 2 fiberglass layers. I've had a few people ask me now how fiberglass turns clear when epoxy is spread over it. Essentially, the best explanation that I can offer is that the fabric is truly made out of glass. Because there's air between each of the glass fibers, it is essentially the same effect that makes whitewater white. When the air between the fibers is replaced with epoxy, the material becomes transparent. The key part about this step is to move thorough and fast. If there ended up being bubbles in the layup, it would drastically decrease the boat's integrity. The first fiberglass layer went on pretty well, but there did end up being a couple bubbles. These were caused by inconsistencies in the wood, but again, I'll take what I can get. Also, I'm sorry if the audio quality in this voiceover is kind of bad. I'm a baker, so my phone's microphone gets filled with flour. And there we go. That concludes episode 1 of building a cedar strip carbon kayak. If you've enjoyed the video and you want to support the project, I've put a link in the description for donations. If you couldn't already tell, my hourly wage is grossly in the negative. Any support for this project would be greatly appreciated. I've also considered selling some custom cedar foamy boats per request. If this is of interest, you can reach out to me on Instagram or shoot me an email. Contact info can be found in the description as well. If for some reason you'd like to purchase a cedar strip kayak, you can reach out to me and I'll start building your boat for the low cost of around $10,000. Stay tuned for episode 2.